like to welcome everyone. It's Tisha B'Av, so I'm not really saying hi, but it's nice to see everyone here for an exciting tour here. So basically, what we're going to be doing in this tour, can everybody hear me? Just thumbs up if you hear me. Okay, excellent. This meeting is also being recorded. I'm going to edit it later. And as you know, those who've been with me on other virtual tours, if you want to, you can contact me later. I'll give you a private link so that you can only view it. It's a private link for everybody who signed up. In case you want to catch up or something, you missed something. So it's edited. Once it's edited, that means that nobody's going to be able to see the participants' faces. You just see me and you see the screen that I'm sharing with you. Okay. So this is a virtual tour of 4 key sites and lessons for today. It's a very special tour that I put together for Tisha B'Av. And what I'm attempting to do here in about 45 minutes is to go over to show you 4 sites on the map and to also show you some of the archaeology that is known from those different sites and where you can find them, what museums they are in, and to talk about the specific story as it relates to the Tisha B'Av story, which means it has to do with different periods of destruction. I'm going to refer to texts and Lamentations, but with one exception, I'm not going to be showing you the actual texts. I'd like to keep this visual. Many of us are fasting today. It's exhausting. I don't want to go through texts. So, some of the texts that I'm going to mention are from the Lamentations, the Kinot that were read this morning that are familiar from Tisha B'Av, but I'm going to refer to them so at least the story is going to be known. I'm going to go over the story. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing, I just want to mention, some people are signing on with the name as like iPhone. I don't know who. I have a list here of everybody who signed up and paid to admit them. I don't know who iPhone is. So I'm assuming that if you have the link, you signed on, but it's important to let me know who it is. Give me just 1 second. Somebody else also didn't get the link. I have to figure out why people. Okay. So this is our map. The big idea is to know where we are, and then we'll talk about when we are, because we're talking about 4 different periods. So this is a map of the ancient Near East, courtesy of the Babylonian Museum, Jerusalem. And I want to focus on the left-hand side of the map, which is in our region of the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Yehuda. So we're just going to call that ancient Israel, and several different sites. So you can see Samaria right here as the capital of the Kingdom of the 10 Tribes, the Kingdom of Israel. We're going to talk about Shomron. We're going to talk about sites that are in the area of Judea, so not Jerusalem itself. Might allude to it a bit. And we're going to talk about some cities that are on the coast, like Caesarea, as well as up north. We're going to talk about Megiddo. So each one of these stories, I'm going to show you how exactly they're connected. Let us get started. I'm going to share my Google Earth screen. 1 moment, please. Okay, so here we are. So our first site is Tel Megiddo National Park. I want you to see where it is on the map and why it is that we're talking about Megiddo. So Megiddo is right over here. Tel Megiddo National Park is one of the important cities of the First Temple period of the ancient Near East. That's because of its location. It's also on top of a mountain. We're going to zoom in there in just a moment. And the site is a key site in some of it's known many battles. Some of them are before we even came into the land of Israel, like Thutmose III is a very famous story. Thutmose III, he's known as the ruler who came after the famous Pharaoh queen Hatshepsut. So he's a famous guy. He captured Megiddo. He had a famous battle there. But I want to talk about a battle which has to do with Tisha B'Av, and it's actually the topic of one of the Lamentations. It's actually the source of Lamentations, the source of the Kinot. And that has to do with the battle which gave its name to Armageddon, the Battle of Megiddo. That sort of a mistranslation of what Armageddon is meant to be. It's a battle of Tel Megiddo. So let's go into the site itself, first of all. So here's the site. I just drove past it. It's in the Jezreel Valley, Emek Israel. It's on the top, on a hilltop. Let's get a better view of how this site looks. The site of Megiddo has a commanding view of the coast, which is right here, of the coast and the ancient road going from Egypt all the way up to Syria, which is going to fit into our story very soon. It's on the hilltop. It's a powerful city. It's a commanding city, which also has a very famous a water system, which is attributed to the kings of Israel, like Yerovam II. And you're looking down at the Tel you're looking at the excavations. There's been almost 100 years of excavations here. You see the different buildings that were uncovered, different palaces and structures and city gates. Right here below is the famous water well, the water pool, which is attributed again to Yerovam II, the king of Israel. And there's a lot to see here. It's a very important site to visit. When you go to visit the site, before we move on to the other museum stuff about the site, I just want to show you there's a model there. When you enter the site, there's a model showing you a reconstruction of the ancient gates from the biblical period, from the time of our story, which is roughly 2,800 years ago. This is showing you a city on the top of a mountain, which before the invention of airplanes, of course, means that you control the roads, right? You control the passageways. So it's a very important city for that reason, because it controls the route which goes from Egypt to Syria. And that's going to be a key part of our story. Let me just see if this, okay. So our story, before we get into our story, I want to show you some things from Megiddo. So I'm going to show you Megiddo in two different museums. One of them is in Israel and the other one is in Chicago. So let's go to the Israel Museum first. If you're not so used to the jumping around on Google Earth, my apologies. I'll try not to do it too often, but it does jump and zoom and give you this effect. Now we are in the Israel Museum in the area which is dedicated to the kingdom of Israel and Judah. And you're looking at an image. This is actually from Chatzor, but I wanted you to see this iconic image because you're familiar with it. You recognize it from the 5 shekel coin. And a note about that is that all of the modern Israeli coins are using archaeology, which is relevant to the kingdoms of Israel and Yehuda from the first and second temple periods, because it's sort of a revival idea. It's this iconic connection to our ancient roots. So that's something that's worth noting. And I want to show you this image itself. It's called a proto-Aeolic capital. That's the technical term for this structure. And it kind of looks like a stylized palm branches, branching outwards, curling. This image is the hallmark of royal building, royal construction from the times of the first temple period. So anywhere this is found, it's a royal building, and it is found in the kingdom of Israel, which means in the north. It's found in the kingdom of Yehuda, and it's also found in the Transjordan, which means that this is something in the entire area. It's not specific to the kings of Yehuda. It's a broad discussion, but I want to show you a whole lot more of them. We're going to see more of them as we go. And these ones here on the top are from Megiddo. In other words, they were found in the site which we are now visiting, the site of Megiddo. And these again from the 5 shekel coin. Now, these were also found very recently in an article published just this past year in the site on right by Ramat Rachel in Armon HaNetziv, which changed the history books in terms of where we assumed the royal palace was at the time. So not getting into all those details, but the point is that this is the hallmark of royal building from the kingdom of Israel and Judah, and it's throughout the country. So that's one. Now, hold on, because I'm about to make a serious time warp jump, and you can get a little bit dizzy. But we are going to Chicago. Okay, before we zoom in, just a word about Chicago. The Oriental Institute Museum of the University of Chicago is a treasure for the study of Tanakh in general. It was founded by James Breasted, who is famous for coining the term the Fertile Crescent. So the Fertile Crescent as a reference to the ancient Near East, but specifically the rivers of Mesopotamia and the Nile. So we all know that. We grew up in school hearing about the Fertile Crescent, or in Hebrew, Hasahar HaPoreh. That coin was termed by the founder of this museum. Now, the Oriental Institute Museum, I want to mention two important things about it. Number one is that it's built in chronological order in relationship to Tanakh. And even though it was founded by a Christian, which means that when they say Bible, they also mean New Testament, he said Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, Old Testament, because the roots of Tanakh are really in the ancient Near East, and all the new stuff, the Greek stuff, the Roman stuff, that is less connected to the core identity of Tanakh, which is a brilliant insight, which is why it ends with the Persian period and it does not go past that, unlike other biblical period museums like the British Museum and so on, which will go into the Greek and Roman period and will consider that biblical. So it's more loyal to Tanakh, which is why it's a valuable resource. And the museum itself also has, I mean, it's as part of the University of Chicago, they have an annual conference of archaeological discoveries from around the world, and it is the archaeology. It's called ASOR, the Association of Studies of Oriental Research. That is the convention of archaeology. All the excavations that are happening now in the summer in Israel, all of their publications are being kept secret until mid-November, where they get to the ASOR convention and they reveal them. So the ASOR convention is a big deal. This year, I believe it's taking place in Chicago. But it's in a different state every year. So we're now inside the Oriental Institute Museum, and we are, as you can see, looking at finds from Megiddo. So you can always come and visit this later. I'm happy to send you references and links and so on, but it shows you here that it's the cultural crossroads of the ancient Near East because of its location. Its location is on the crossroads. Now, the land of Israel itself is on the crossroads between three continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. So we're constantly involved in all of these movements between different empires as they make their way across the globe. You know, they're trying to conquer, and we're always there. So that's important. But a few finds. You can look at the far end, and we're going to get close there. You're going to see at the corner is one of those Proto-Aeolic capitals, which I mentioned. But let's start from here. There's several different periods that have been excavated there. So ivories. We're going to see a whole bunch of ivories. Ivories, this is an earlier period. This is the Canaanite period, which was conquered by, you know, when we came in. There's ivories on the top, Phoenician style ivories, and so on, and ivories inlaid with gold, like this one, which shows you that there's this wealth going through the city. And again, we're going to see more ivories later. But these are all pieces of ivory, which were laid into furniture, which were laid into wooden structures, into walls. The ivory, which comes from, by the way, not necessarily from elephants, or not exclusively from elephants, but also from the teeth of hippopotami. So that's also considered ivory, both elephants and hippopotami. So this is ivory, and ivory is luxury. We say Batei Hashen, ivory palaces, which are known to have been, you know, in the ancient Near East as a status symbol of here I have ivories in my palace, like King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech had ivory in his palace. Achav had ivory palaces in Samaria. We're going to talk about those too. So we're looking at a rich city. Now let's move on to the more Israelite period of the city. Just moving around. So we're going to get there in a moment, but look, sorry about that. There's a structure here. There's a stone structure, which I think you'd be able to guess what it is, right? You've probably seen these before or understand them from description. It's a bit broken, but that is an altar, a mizbeach. Altars in the ancient Near East were more or less this shape, and they had corners. They had four corners. So the mizbeach that we learn about in the temple and in the Mishkan is built in the ancient Near Eastern method of having four corners. And this was found in Megiddo. We found a bunch of them around Israel. But let's kind of jump past this and look up here on top, and we will recognize the Proto-Aeolic capital like the ones in the Israel Museum. These were excavated, I think, in the 1920s by the Oriental Institute of Chicago, 1920s, 1930s. by the donations of John D. Rockefeller. He's done a lot of these excavations, stuff in the Metropolitan Museum as well. So that's one. And there's another tiny one right over here. And these are all pottery and stamps and things which were found from the Jewish settlement of the city. So that's what this area is dedicated to. So there's some tiny, really, really nice tiny one, just like the ones found in the excavations recently in by the Tayelet, by Armona Natziv. Very small, nicely built. So that's the image that we've seen that identifies the Jewish period, you can say, the Israelite period. Now here to the right, since we're already in the museum, I'm just going to mention it in passing, but you see the land of the Bible. They have here Second Temple period finds from Israel, like a mosaic. Mosaic is always going to be Roman and up. You don't have mosaics before that. You might recognize this jug from the Qumran caves, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls inside these jugs. And on the left here is a sarcophagus from the Second Temple period, and on and on. So there's something from the Gaonic period, the Tannaitic period. From all of these things are Israel in the time of the Second Temple. It's a nice small display. It's not our topic for today, but that was the Oriental Institute. Now, I'd like to mention, of course, how exactly this is connected to our story of Tisha B'Av. So to do that, I'm going to take us back to our slide. And that is to do with Yoshyahu HaMelech, King Yoshyahu. Yoshyahu was 25 years before the Babylonian destruction of the first temple. He is the fifth to last king. So we have Yoshyahu, and then after him, we have two kings who ruled for 11 years and two kings who ruled for several months. Now, Yoshyahu is a very interesting character. I'm going to mention why he's important in Jewish tradition. In other words, the traditional approach to him. But it's worth mentioning as well in the academic literature why Yoshyahu is important. And I want to point out a very important difference between the two perspectives, which I think has a very important lesson to us, which is very relevant to Tisha B'Av. So bear with me. Our story happens when the Assyrian Empire has fallen, and I'm going to show you exactly where. Let me just move back. The Assyrian army has fallen to the hands of Babylon and the Medes. So there's a coalition of the Medes and the Babylonians. You see them here on the right in the far east. And the city of Nineveh here on the top has been burned in the year 612 before the Common Era, so 2,600 years ago. And the Assyrian Empire is fallen, is destroyed. It's death throes. It's trying to somehow hold on to power. And in their desperation, they make an alliance with their enemies, the Egyptians. And from Egypt comes Paro Necho II, who is traveling through the coast of Israel and making his way all the way to the city of Carchemish in modern-day Syria on the border with Turkey. So on the Euphrates River, Al Nahar Prat. Now, the Battle of Carchemish is mentioned in Tanakh in two places. It's mentioned in Melachim Bet, and it's mentioned in Divrei Hayamim. And the Battle of Carchemish is the battle in which Yoshyahu gets killed. He doesn't get killed in Carchemish, but what happens is that Paro Necho comes to aid their enemies, the Assyrians, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as we know. And so Babylon is much worse than Assyria in their eyes. Assyria allies with Egypt, and they meet in Carchemish 7 years after the fall of the capital of Assyria, the capital called Nineveh. And that's where the Assyria is completely decimated, and Egypt also suffers a tremendous battle, a tremendous loss, and they lose to Babylon, and this is the rise of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Now, the story that concerns us happens on the way to Carchemish through the coast. So we're follow me from Egypt. You're going up the coast towards Carchemish. You're going to pass by the Judean coast, and you're going to pass by the city of Megiddo. So Yoshyahu, instead of course, drawing attention to Jerusalem, which is sensitive, which is the capital, he tries to bottleneck Paro Necho on his way to Carchemish in the city of Megiddo, where he believes he has the fortifications, he has the advantage, and he literally has the upper ground. Paro Necho, this is a small statuette from the Brooklyn Museum, that is in right by Crown Heights. So he blocks him. He blocks Paro Necho, and Paro Necho says to him in the words of Tanakh, "Why are you attacking me? I have no quarrel with you. Let me go. I'm in a hurry." And Yoshiyahu HaMelech blocks him and does not let him go. And so Necho is forced to kill him. He kills him and then continues up to Carchemish, comes down and kills the next king, Yehoachaz, who's appointed by the Jews as well, and maintains control until Babylon controls the area. So to summarize this story, our involvement in foreign affairs led to the downfall of our control of the area and bringing in Babylon. That's really in a nutshell. On the left-hand side from Yehuda Landy's excellent book Uncovering Sefer Yirmiyahu, I can send you a link to that on Amazon later if you want, is signatures or bule signatures signed by Necho II. This is his hieroglyphic form. So, and this was found in the area by Megiddo on the way to Carchemish. So he had his messages in the area. He left debris, let's put it that way. So this is the character known as Paro Necho. Now, the reason it's important to us, first of all, from the Jewish perspective, is according to our tradition that Yirmiyahu, that Jeremiah, the prophet Yirmiyahu, warns Yeshayahu, Josiah, to stay out of foreign affairs, to maintain your local control, to keep things local. Now, the reason that he was able to do that is because of the decline of Assyria. So he was able to rebuild the economy. You're not paying taxes. And one of the things Yeshayahu was doing was a restoration of worshiping God and getting rid of idolatry from throughout the country. And he's considered to be a righteous king, the best we've ever had in his attempt to bring people back to doing things properly, right? The way they should be done. And that is a major operation which he undertook. Now, this is where we have a very critical difference between what the academic world looks at this. And he says they don't call this Yoshiyahu, Josiah's restoration, but rather his reformations. In other words, they say idolatry and temples and all that stuff was common and normal and acceptable throughout the country. And then came along Yeshayahu and said, I'm going to reform everything and change that and start something new, which is like worshiping one God and not worshiping many gods, which was what was found earlier. The reason I'm mentioning this is because the difference between the two is all about Tisha B'Av. Because Tisha B'Av is about trying to understand what went wrong in its core, in its roots, and to correct it. And that's what Yoshiyahu was trying to do. And he failed and he got killed, right? And that lamentation, which Jeremiah laments him, is written on the books of the Lamentations. Vayikonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu is really the source for the concept of Lamentations itself, comes from this story. We lost a giant, a person who really cared, who was really motivated and really put in the resources of the entire kingdom to try to restore things to the way they should have been all along. And saying that he reformed things and made something new, of course, is a complete difference. It means that from this perspective, he wasn't trying to restore something. He just invented something new, which just changed the picture. So I'm, as you know, as an educator, I feel responsible to mention those two things, because if you study this in terms of archaeology, you're going to hear these two sides. So it's important to recognize. But that is the story of Yoshiyahu. To sum up, the story of the site of Megiddo, where he was killed, is the site which epitomizes to us the attempt to make things right, which failed. And like, how can we do things beyond what he did today, when he had the resources of the country and he tried to get it done and he failed? So that's why we lament it. It's something that feels like, how could we possibly even strive to do what he did? Every attempt that we have is kind of laughable in comparison with him, and he failed. So where are we? And that is the story of Megiddo. The second story is the city of Samaria. So let's go back to our map. Now, Samaria is an earlier story, but I felt that to get into the mood, the spirit of Tisha B'Av, I wanted to start with Megiddo, because that's really the concept of Kinot, of Lamentations, and trying to make things right. But the earlier story has to do with the fall of Samaria. So just to zoom out to see where we are, we're actually in what is today the Palestinian Authorities, or the West Bank, whatever you call it, but we're talking about what was in the biblical period the capital of the kingdom of the north, the kingdom of Israel, known as Shomron, Samaria, established by Omri, the Omridic dynasty. So we are not far from Shechem. We're north of Jerusalem, And this is the ancient site. Now, there's actually every once in a while there's organized trips into Sebastia, into Samaria. The site is called Sebastia now, and you can actually see things there. So I want to show you a little bit of the things that we see on site, and then to talk about what we find in the Israel Museum and how that relates to our destruction story as well. So let's go into Sebastia. Just to the entrance to the site, you get on a bus, an organized trip, and here you are. You come to the ancient site. Now, the site, as mentioned, is of importance for our story to the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, which is First Temple period. But the more, if you have a sharp eye to archaeology, you'll recognize that this is Roman Byzantine. So these are Roman pillars. This is a Corinthian capital right here. We find them all over the Cardo and the Jewish quarter, all over Israel. We find this. This is the Roman period who have left their mark on the country. So we have a lot of these, like this, the theater in Caesarea and all these different things. This is clearly Roman. But it's not the only thing we find here, because it was also Sebastia, which is a Greek-Roman city, which was later on in the story of Hanukkah. This is actually where the Greek soldiers come to attack us from. They're not coming in from in ships from Greece. They're coming from Sebastia, which is the base camp. They're coming into the cities, the hills of Gofna and Modi'in and so on. So let's take you to some more contemporary, to our story, that is. Okay. So first of all, well, another Roman site. This is a basilica. So just one more, a Byzantine basilica, which means it's basically a hallway with arches on the sides, and there's a nave in the center. This is really cool if you want to talk about the archaeology of ancient synagogues, because they're very much related. But let's look at the older stuff. Okay. So these excavations, which again are open to the public only at certain times, you can organize it, but there are organized trips there. These are the ruins of a First Temple period palace, the palace which is believed to be the palace of Achaz, or Omri and Achaz. And the reason for that, of course, is what was found inside them. So first of all, just so you see the site, we're looking at the mountains of Shomron around us, and you see that there's a very vast palace here. It's a royal building. That's the first thing. Now, one moment. I want to take you from here to what was found in these very ruins in the Israel Museum. So bear with me as you jump one more time into the Israel Museum. Okay, so palace interiors, which just to walk out a little bit to see where we are. We were just here a few minutes ago. Here we were, recognize those. And we are looking at more ivories. So I mentioned we're going to talk about ivories, and I'm going to show them to you on a slide so you can really appreciate what we're looking at. But first, see these in this entire corner. These are all Phoenician style ivories, which means the fashion statement of the time. And there's boule, like signatures, there's gold jewelry, and all kinds of other things here. There's some pottery as well. Look around. I'll show you. There's some pottery as well. We're going to look at some of these up close. There's a lot of more things. This was filmed a while ago. If you go to the Israel Museum today, you'll find Chizkiyahu's seal and all kinds of other things. If you want to come with me this Tuesday, I'm doing a tour in the Israel Museum, but on a completely different topic. But this is where they have palace interiors from Judea and from Judea and Israel, Yehuda and Israel, Shomron, Yerushalayim. So let's look at these up close. And these are the ivories that we just looked at. They're known as the Samaria ivories. Now, if you're familiar with the story of Achaz, Captain Ahaz, as he's called in Moby Dick, but Achaz, he was the rival of the arch nemesis of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And he constantly had a showdown with him. And eventually he marries Jezebel, who is a queen from the northern kingdom of the Phoenicians, the Canaanite kingdom of the Phoenicians, who were the big exporters and producers, manufacturers of the finest Phoenician ivory, of course. So this also demonstrates international connection and trade and so on. And you're looking here at the different types of Phoenician ivory that was inlaid into the royal palace, into furniture. But the one on the right, it is really fascinating, shows you the burning of Samaria. It shows you an ivory which is charred, black, because we know that Samaria was burned by Tiglath-Pileser and by Shalmaneser V, that is, when he destroyed the kingdom of the 10 tribes. As we know, they're the 10 lost tribes. We see the echoes of that burning. Now, this is the one exception, which I'm going to actually show you some text. We have, just to get an example of what it looked like in furniture just for a moment. This is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and this is in the Roman period, but it shows you ivory inlaid into a bed. So just you get an idea of what this would be doing in a palace. It's in furniture, in beds, in chairs, in walls, etc. Now, this is the first text I'm showing you. We're not going to actually sit here and read it, but these are pictures of pottery on the top, known as the Chersei Shomron, the pottery from Samaria. So we saw the Samaria ivories, and we see the pottery, which is names of people and the years to the king, and it's lists perhaps of taxes, of oil and of wine, which were, of course, going through the palace itself, through the administrative center. And there are those like Yigael Yadin who suggest that this is showing you King Menachem, who had an alliance with, had to pay tribute to the King Tiglath-Pileser. He's collecting taxes in order to pay him. So this is showing you the ancient Hebrew alphabet from the First Temple period, and you can go through this. You can look up the Chersei Shomron, the Samaria pottery, but I want to show you this one lamentation, and with this we're going to wrap up the part of Samaria. Shomron, the capital of Israel, was destroyed by the Assyrians, and Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, was destroyed by the Babylonians, and later on by the Romans. One very poignant lamentation is called Shomron Kol Titen by Ibn Gbirol from the, I think, 15th, 16th century. And Shlomo ibn Gbirol, and he talks about like taking words from the book of Yechezkel, which really he's playing on those words, where Shomron and Jerusalem both are two sisters, and each one suffered, and each one says to the other, I had it worse than you, so don't you cry, look what happened to me. So this is just a piece of it, but Shomron is saying, oh, my iniquities have found me, and my children have been sent out to another country. And Oholiva, which is a reference to Jerusalem, says, Nisrefu armonai, my palaces were burned. Vatomer Tzion azavani Hashem. God has forsaken me. And it goes on and on. So the first part is saying, don't consider your loss to mine. I mean, you know, you were destroyed. I was destroyed once. You were destroyed 3 times, but you all came back, and my children have not come back. They're still lost. So it mentions Tiglath-Pileser here. It mentions Lachlach and Chavor, which is some of the places where we were dispersed to in the exile of the 10 tribes. So this is one of the Lamentations in spirit of Tisha B'Av, and it talks about the fall of the kingdom of Israel. Okay, now, this is a recent discovery, which was, they published it just last week or 2 weeks ago. This is a picture I took from Yediot, but it's famous. You can Google it. A section of the First Temple period wall from the Babylonian Destruction period, which was uncovered around Ir David. There's a northern and a southern segment of this wall, which was just uncovered. So this article is fresh off the press, and we're comparing the fall of Samaria, Shomron, to the fall of Jerusalem, so that while Jerusalem was rebuilt several times, we're still visiting its destruction layer today. And this is part of the wall which actually was not destroyed and remained standing. And this is the wall that the Babylonians saw when they came and besieged Jerusalem. So we have this very lamentation that is being echoed here in archaeology. We saw the burning of Samaria's palaces with the burning of the Samaria ivories, and we are seeing Jerusalem's wall, which this part remains standing, but we're seeing the walls of Jerusalem from that period of time. So it's really fascinating to see that. And that was the story of Samaria. Now we have 2 more sites to visit, and our time is pretty short, so I'm going to jump straight into it. And our next site is going to be Caesarea, and then Beitar. So to start Caesarea, of course, we have to mention who built Caesarea Maritima to what it is known for, with its theaters, its hippodrome, its palaces, and that is, of course, the great builder Herod the Great, the one who brought the Roman period into the land of Israel. He really made Israel Roman ready, that is. He made it, basically, when you say, what have the Romans ever done for us? That's Herod the Great, who brought all that building in. So he built the second temple, as we know. But I want to take us to Caesarea and to stories which relate specifically to the Hurban. So before this tour, I was just reading through Josephus. This is a more recent publication with the painting of the sacking of Jerusalem in the Israel Museum. It's a famous painting that was uncovered by a connoisseur. The Rabbi Sachs wrote a piece about it. It's a beautiful story. Don't have so much time for, but Josephus talks in length about the Jews of Caesarea, leading up to the rebellion, the Great Revolt, and after. So in a nutshell, first of all, Caesarea itself, you see the coast in the background with the aqueduct, and these inscriptions have to do with its renovations by Hadrian, who we're going to talk about very soon. But let's go to Caesarea. So the story of Caesarea is a very, very tragic one. We have the Caesarea beach here, of course. We all know the Caesarea Theater, which is mistakenly called an amphitheater. It's really a half theater. Amphi means full theater, like the Colosseum. Now, the iconic Caesarea, we know the aqueduct, because the aqueduct which Herod built turned Caesarea into a wealthy city because you have water. So once you have flowing water brought in from other places, you can sustain a large economy and a large population. And this was a very, very wealthy city with many Jews and many pagans living side by side. And in fact, leading up to the Great Revolt, the Jews were a very powerful part of society there. They were part of the equestrian society, basically people who were, how do I explain, equestrian, they're from the upper echelon of society, a certain status in the Roman world, which means you can't, for example, publicly shame them or give them lashes, which the Roman governor Florus actually did. So Florus, I'm going to mention Florus because the cause for the Great Rebellion really started here in Caesarea. It's here in the city of Caesarea where the problems which were happening with a series of mismanaged situations, and the governors who mismanaged the political situation and the religious situation between the Jews and the Gentiles and extorted them, are really what led to the outbreak of the Great Revolt in the summer of the year 66 of the Common Era, which is what led to the destruction of Jerusalem. So it all started here in Caesarea, and that's what Josephus talks about, how there was a particular Gentile who came and blocked the entrance to the synagogue and offered birds to mock the Jews, and that started. This is after many times where the Jews and the Gentiles constantly, went head to head, and the elders tried to calm it down and calm people down, and just people are constantly looking for something to fight about. So it's the way Florus managed this, who I said, yes, he took bribery, I'm going to take care of it, and he didn't take care of it, which really pushed the people over and led them to fighting. So here in Caesarea, there's a story of the Caesarea synagogue, which is here a little bit to the north of the Sdot Yam, and the Kibbutz Sdot Yam, the famous story of Chana Senesh, Ha'alicha LeCaesarea. And the synagogue, which is mentioned there, which ended up the slaughtering of Jews. And after the story of the destruction, we have Jews fighting as gladiators and being killed there in the theaters there in Caesarea. That synagogue has not been found, but we found a Byzantine period synagogue, and that is a synagogue which is important as well. And I want to show you why, because of what we found inside the synagogue. So inside the synagogue, this is a picture by Gilad Peli from the Roman Byzantine period synagogue, which is like 4th, 5th, 6th century. But this is also a wealthy synagogue, which eventually was destroyed and abandoned. So you see there's mosaics on the floor as well. There's a colorful picture where there's a little bit of perhaps an inscription, but it's a little bit hard to see. but inscriptions are one of the ways you find out that it's a synagogue. This is one of two very important inscriptions from the synagogue. Now, this inscription relates to one of the Kinot, one of the Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av as well as on Yom Kippur, which is about the destruction of the 24 priestly shifts, the 24 Mishmorot Kehuna. Now, there's only 3 fragments here that were found, and you see that most of this is reconstructed. So how do we know what it actually said? That's a great question. This is from Yitzchak Naveh, also Al Psifas Ve'ev, has a book all about the inscription. So he shows you there that there is a similar inscription found in Yemen. So it's based on that, and also some of the writings that we have, the literature that we have, that we're able to reconstruct this, because we know that this was part of the repertoire of inscriptions that would be found on synagogue floors, just like we find the zodiac, right? There's certain things that you will always find in a synagogue: zodiacs, dedication plaques, and so on. And sometimes you'll find biblical scenes and other kinds of texts. And this is one of them. So Mishmeret HaRishona, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's 3 of these. So this is one. Now, this is important because this is showing you on the floor of a synagogue a connection to our glorious past, where we had 24 active operational houses, shifts of Kohanim who took turns serving in the temple. So, and this is lamented as well. And this piece here as well is pieces of a sarcophagi, which was Jewish. Now, you look carefully and see what language is it, and how do we know that it's Jewish? So it's Greek, which was the common Jewish language at the time. We're talking about 5th, 6th century. And we know it's Jewish because of the iconic image, the menorah, and there's a shofar and a lulav. Now, I actually have a tour about this in the Israel Museum, every Tuesday of the summer, where I go through the Jewish iconography and symbols throughout the ages. So if you want a little bit more in depth on that, you can always, I'll send some information in that towards the end. But this is found in Caesarea. So that's our story from Caesarea. I think I put a little bit here from the Israel Museum as well, just so you see an example of fragments of Jewish tombstones and the iconography of the menorah and so on. So this is here in the Israel Museum, okay? So this is the story of Caesarea in a nutshell. Our time is short, so I'm going to wrap up with Beitar. The story of Beitar is just a little bit further down the hall here. That is with Adrianus Caesar in the 18th year of Hadrian, who is known in world history as one of the 5 good emperors. In our tradition, we say Shchik Adrianus Shchik Atzamot, may his bones be ground to dust, because of his cruel suppression of the Bar Kokhva revolt. Now, the Bar Kokhva revolt took place under the rulership of Hadrian, who tried to rebuild Jerusalem, but he made a few critical errors in terms of the sensitivities of the locals. We are about 70 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. Now, 70 years after the destruction of the First Temple, we have the Cyrus Edict, Cyrus Proclamation, and people's hopes getting up to come and build the temple. We now have the Second Temple, and 70 years after, we have Hadrian coming and saying, hey, let's rebuild Jerusalem. And what is everybody thinking? We're going to rebuild the temple. But Hadrian has a little bit of a different idea. He calls Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, naming it after himself and the Capitoline god Zeus. And he builds a temple for Zeus. This is what we know today, based on the archaeological finds, as well as the writings of Cassius Dio, is the reason for the Bar Kokhva revolt. And the revolt itself is remarkable because it took almost half of the Roman army to suppress this revolt, whereas it took only 3 legions to suppress the great revolt of the Second Temple period. The Bar Kokhva revolt, it took, I think, 12 legions to suppress. So it was a complete devastating, an utter destruction and loss. Now, throughout the Bar Kokhva revolt, leading up to the revolt, we prepared extensively. We dug tunnels under houses, escape routes, so that you can just hit and run, hit a Roman soldier and hide underground and nobody was going to find you. And of course, there's also the caves, the Bar Kokhva caves. So the display here next to us shows you many of the things that were found in these caves, like Vadi Murabat and so on, and Nachal Chevel, Nachal Mishmar, and some of these things, we know there were scrolls that were found as well. There's coins. I want to highlight some of these and talk about the fall of the city of Beitar. In this display here are things I'm going to show you up close. But the city of Beitar is really what signifies the complete destruction of the Bar Kokhva revolt and the victory of the Roman Empire. And from that point on, Jews were forbidden to come into Jerusalem for several hundred years. So we are looking at what's today in the Palestinian authorities. It's Kfar Batir, ancient Beitar, but it's named, as many Arab villages and towns are, after an ancient Jewish site, which is pretty much a miracle. That's one of the ways we can identify ancient sites in Israel, is because the Arabic name preserved the local name, which is not the same in Egypt and throughout the rest of the world. So it's pretty much a miracle archaeologically and historically. So here's the ancient city of Batir, but the city of Beitar right over here, which was identified in the 1930s, right, 1920s, 1930s, it's called, the English here is Khirbet Jews, which is kind of funny, but it's Khirbet El Yahud, the Jewish destruction, the Jewish Khirbet. I want to show it to you. One sec. Where are we? Hold on. Yeah, okay, so that's fine. So this is Khirbet El Yahud. So what was found here, now it's not really open to the public, but what's really fascinating about this place is what was found there. So we know the story of Masada, right? In the story of Masada, we have the fanatics, the zealots, who were causing the Romans a lot of trouble and were already after the destruction of the Second Temple. But the Jews of Masada are putting up a fight, and the Roman legions camp around there, and they built a siege ramp, a solela, and they build Roman camps, which are stone structures of Roman camps around the city, and then they end up destroying it. This place, what you're looking at now, is from David Usishkin, and it shows you here, number one in the center is Khirbet El Yahud, and it's next to Nachal Rephaim, Nachal Beitar, and you're seeing here number 5, 2 of 8 Roman camps which were built around Beitar. That's more than what it took to take down Masada. There is a 4,000 meter wall, 4-kilometer siege ramp, which was built by the Romans to take down Masada. This is much, to take down Beitar, much larger than Masada. A lot more effort was put into it, and taking down Beitar is what completely destroyed the Bar Kokhva revolt, and it was a much greater destruction than that of Masada and that of the Second Temple period. There is also a milestone found here. That's number 3. There is the road from Beit Guvrin, from Beit Guvrin to Jerusalem, passes right by her. We know that because of a milestone built by Hadrian himself. So that's kind of cool. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of finds from the battle, sling stones, arrowheads, and destruction, and so on. This is the city of Beitar. But what do we know about the person himself? So first of all, here's some of the Jewish building that was destroyed. A lot of it's no longer available. It's built on top of. It is what it is. But this is from the ancient Beitar, Batir. This is also an inscription that was found, not unlike what we saw by Caesarea, a dedication plaque, but this is one which has to do with the Roman legion which was there, found by Clermont-Ganneau. You know, in Jerusalem, there's a street, Clermont-Ganneau, named after this excavator. But I want to show you 2 things. Number 1, the person Bar Kokhva. In Wadi Murabat, which means the square valley, where, because the cave entrances were kind of square, Meruba, Wadi Murabat, they found, Yigael Yadin found this letter, and he's famous for saying this, the first major general, the first Ramatkal of Israel, is holding the letter of the last Ramatkal of Israel, Shimon Bar Kokhva. And if you try to read it from the top, Mishimon ben Kosba, from Shimon ben Kosba. And this is our primary source for knowing that the man known as Bar Kokhva had a first name, which is Shimon. We do not know that from our traditional sources. We know that only from archaeology. And his name is Ben Kosba. Bar Kokhva is much later. It's like 4th century where somebody calls him, I think it's Hieronymus, calls him Bar Kokhva, and he talks about the Darach Kochav Miyakov. We looked at him as the star, mentioned in the Rambam and Maimonides as well. People thought he was the Messiah, right? But his original name was Ben Kosba, and Shimon ben Kosba. So that's really cool. This is one of his letters. And the other one here, which is what I'm going to wrap up with, has to do with the city of Beitar. So this one was relating specifically to Beitar. It's very hard to read, but he's writing here to his people in Ein Gedi and in another place saying, I want you to guarantee, to make sure that my garrison, my soldiers who are buried in Beitar, in the fortifications of Beitar, fighting against the Romans, have arba minim, have their 4 species to celebrate Sukkot on time. And we see that he had this concern for the religious well-being as well of his people. Now, we know that he had the support of Rabbi Akiva. This is mentioned in the Talmud, it's mentioned in the Rambam. But what's really fascinating is the coins that we find. So these coins, this is by Ada Hayardeni, but we found dozens and dozens of these Bar Kokhva coins. And this is a typical Bar Kokhva coin. On the left-hand side is a temple facade with a temple vessel in the center. I leave it for debate. What is that in the center? I know that the easy answer is the Ark of the Covenant, but it might also be the showbread table. But I'm not answering that. It says Shimon on the sides. And in the right-hand side, which is the obverse of the coin, is the Arba Minim. And you'll notice that there's a lulav, an etrog, and 1 hadas and 1 arava, which according to the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as opposed to Rabbi Ishmael, who does what we do today, which is 3 hadassim and 2 aravot. So it's really neat to see that reflected on his coin, and he's talking about that. So this is the city of Beitar. Beitar fell in the year 135 by Hadrian and led to an utter destruction, and that was a failure. It's only in the modern era where the Zionist movement was looking for Jewish heroes of the past to look up to and sing about that Bar Kokhva became a positive character. And you have, let's say, the famous song by Levin Kipnis, Huaya Gibor, where he was a hero and he makes up the story of him running out with a lion. Never happened, but it's a famous kid's story. And that's how Bar Kokhva became what he's known for today. But traditionally, he's looked at as a disaster because of the fact that the way he fought against the Roman, what he did, and his aspirations for being the Mashiach, whatever it is. Now, this is really just an overview of 4 different sites. I hope it wasn't overwhelming. It may have been a little bit too much, but I hope that you took something from this. Of course, if there's any questions and comments, I'm now available right now, but thank you so much for joining. I just want to mention, I'm going to put some text for references and information. If you want to know more, if you want to tell your family friends overseas, I'm also doing the same tour tonight at 11 p.m. That is 4 p.m. Eastern time. So I posted all the links in the chat. You can copy paste. And this Tuesday, and every Tuesday of the summer, I'm doing a tour in the Israel Museum called What is Herzl's Favorite Emoji, which goes through several different periods of Jewish history from ancient to modern, the usage of symbols. Some of the people who've been on the tour are on this Zoom tour right here, so they can tell you had a great time. But anyway, that's that. I'm not doing more than that. Thank you so much for joining. Have a meaningful fast. If you want to unmute yourselves, ask any questions, I'm just going to stop the recording.